Right, well, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you, and it's nice to see so many of you on a slightly bleak Monday morning. So thank you very much for coming, and welcome to the new exciting week. I would, well, just while Mr. Richardson dives for cover, I would also like to welcome some friends who are sitting in on the meeting, and you're extremely welcome. These are two ladies who are local residents in Corby, and they're very interested in how the whole planning system works, whether it be policy as here, or whether it be actual applications and all the rest of it. So you're more than welcome, and we're extremely grateful for the interest that you're showing in the whole system, because it should be a transparent system, and having public interest in what we're up to is really, really important. So today, I'll just run through the agenda. It's a one-item pony. So if we just go to agenda item 1, apologies for non-attendance.
Thank you, Chair. We received apologies from councillors Jenny Bone and Stephen North.
Thank you, and also Sedwin Brown's apologised, I fear. Okay. Members, are there any declarations of interest? No. Okey-doke. And you will see at pages 5 to 8 the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of January. And may I sign these as an accurate record? Okay, thank you. Wonderful. Okay, well, we're nearly finished the meeting. We've only got 3 items to go. Right. Agenda item 4 is a crucially important paper. It is the North Northamptonshire Local Development Scheme. Now, we'll obviously have a detailed introduction from Simon and from Richard and from Sue, so welcome to you all, or Simon and Simon, of course. It's always important to remember that famous double act. The Local Development Scheme is the planning policy suite of documents by which all planning decisions refer. So we put a local plan together. We also put a minerals and waste plan together, and we also put a gypsy and traveller plan together, all of which form part of the local development scheme, which we have to agree an LDS on a statutory basis, and we have to refer it to government and to the Secretary of State, so that they know that this authority has a viable, deliverable suite of local planning documents. At the moment, we have a Part 1 local plan called the Joint Core Strategy. I'm saying this partly for the ladies in the public. I think we're all fairly familiar. But at the moment, we have the Joint Core Strategy, which was adopted in 2016, and is the Part 1 strategic plan that covers the entire area of North Northamptonshire. So credit to the former Joint Planning Committee and Joint Planning Unit. We worked at getting a plan for North Northamptonshire many years before North Northamptonshire was ever going to be an individual authority. So we were a bit ahead of the game in that. The former sovereign areas of Kettering, Corby, Wellingborough and East Northamptonshire also had their Part 2 plans, which go into rather more detail about placemaking and delivery. And those plans have all been adopted. The most recent one was East Northamptonshire, which was adopted in the end of 2023. And all the other plans are extant. So we have a reasonably up-to-date planning policy situation at the moment, albeit that the Joint Core Strategy is getting a little long in the tooth. And so it is important that we now work to achieve a single unified local plan covering the other areas, including minerals and waste, which it will be separate because it includes both parts of Northamptonshire and the Gypsy and Traveller plan. So without further ado, I'll pass over to, who's doing this one? You are, right. I'll pass over to Simon, Mr. Richardson, who's our Head of Planning Policy, and he'll take us through the report. Sorry for the detailed introduction, but I just thought I'd try and explain it more clearly. So, over to you, Simon. The floor's yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So the purpose of this report, this being the draft revised local development scheme, is to consider the local development scheme LDS ahead of its presentation to members of the executive. It's been taken to the executive on the 13th of March, so we're hopeful of being able to feed into that meeting the discussions that have taken place here before resolution around adoption is considered. So, as Chair indicates, the local development scheme is basically it's a project plan setting out the timetable for the preparation of documents that make up the Northamptonshire Development Plan. On the legals side to it, I'm at paragraph 4.3, section 15.1 of the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act requires that the local planning authority must prepare and maintain a scheme to be known as their local development scheme, and that the council should resolve that the LDS is to have effect, and it should specify the date that the LDS is to have effect. So it's a legal requirement. So it's something that we'll adhere to. We do, or we expect to be able to keep our website up to date as well. So provide more of a degree of commentary on the progress that's being made, so that if you have an interest in making representations or being involved in the preparation of documents, you've got two sources that you can refer to, one being the local development scheme, the formal process, and the other one being the website. So we're seeking to keep interested parties up to date. The other element, I suppose, this time around is that the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, that being MHCLG, has asked local planning authorities to review and update their LDSs in light of the revised National Planning Policy Framework that was published just before Christmas, to do so within 12 weeks of the publication of the NPPF. So that means we're required to submit that information to the Ministry no later than the 6th of March. You can see there's a disparity of dates that goes on there, but what we're proposing to do is take the results of the discussions today, make any amendments we feel may be necessary, if any, in association with the LDS. We'll submit that to the Ministry, and then we'll go about taking a further document to the 13th of March, approve that, and if there's any changes that occur, we'll update the Ministry in good time. So it's proposed that members of the Planning Communities Executive Advisory Panel consider the contents of the LDS before the Executive Member for Growth and Regeneration, Councillor Brackenbury, presents it to Executive for adoption. So then I'm moving on now to paragraph 5.4, planning reforms and transitional arrangements. Plan making is taking place within the context of significant reform to the planning and plan making system. Much of the detail is still awaited. We've got some key high-level messages and some quite strong indications around emphasis around growth and development. But in terms of operating the planning system, there's still more to come there. Although there's the transitional arrangements that have been put in place. The government intends that plans will be produced more quickly and will be simplified. The Act sets out that each local planning authority must prepare a local plan and an express restriction that only one local plan may have effect. So there's something there about, I suppose in some ways it's the simplification side of things. You don't have different elements of local plans covering different topic areas or different areas of an authority. They want to see one document, one reference point, so that you are able to absorb and interpret local policy in one particular form. The government has confirmed that December 2026 will mark the end of the transition period for the current system of plan making. So that there's a clear message there we need to go about if we're wishing to fall within the transitional period for preparing the plan and the current programmes that we're largely familiar with, then we're to reach that particular stage and submit ahead of the end of December 2026. The Planning Advisory Service has advised that local planning authorities should only be setting a timetable and seeking to progress a plan under the current system if they are confident that they can get to submission for examination stage by December 2026. So under the new plan-making system, a new plan is unlikely to be adopted before 2028, we estimate. That is, I think, a critical. I know conversations have taken place in other rooms saying, well, why don't we, it's going to be simpler, it's going to be quicker, why don't we hold fire and wait for this quicker, simpler system? But to date, there's no real clarity as to exactly how that plays out and how that looks like. So, does it make sense for us to tread water in the hope that the new system, when it comes about, is going to be swifter and it will be any quicker than the system we're currently operating to? We don't think so. There is still an element of uncertainty about the new system and what that will comprise. So it's considered appropriate to progress under the system officers are familiar with. Timely progress on preparing the local plan will ensure that land supply is kept up to date to meet local needs. So we're moving forward to respond now, not delaying and then looking to respond. Another element within that relates to paragraph 5.16, where it's proposed to also incorporate the Gypsy and Traveller local plan into the Northamptonshire local plan. That point again about there being one statutory policy document to refer to. Whilst there has been slippage in the timetable, significant progress has been made in preparing the local plan, and I hope as members you've been able to see that progress being made. That doesn't mean to say that we can coast from here on in by any stretch of the imagination. There are some contentious issues that we need to grasp a hold of and progress. There's some evidence that we need to bottom out and to develop further to bring ourselves into a position whereby we're comfortable and confident that we have a set of policies that cover all the issues that we want to see within the plan, and we're taking them forward to consultation for comment and for input, and then we'll respond to those comments so that we're developing and improving the quality and contents of the plan as it progresses. Another point that we've discussed in this meeting is around the plan period. So the current plan period for the Northamptonshire local plan is 2021 to 2041. So paragraph 22 of the National Planning Policy Framework sets out that strategic policies should look ahead for a minimum of 15-year period from adoption. So given the anticipated adoption is 2027, the current plan period would not meet the requirements of the NPPF. It's therefore proposed to extend the plan period to 2045. And I understand from colleagues that, that there have been examinations at which the inspector in more recent times has indicated there's not that 15-year period, that headroom. I want you to go back and I want you to extend that period. So you're providing substantive policies for that extended period. It's sufficiently forward-looking. I think it's one of those areas. Why would we take the risk when the messages are there? We need to go about ensuring it. What it does for us is it makes it that little bit more challenging. It does mean that we'll need to revisit some of the evidence, but we think we can do so quickly and extend that period. And it does mean that on the face of it, when you start looking at growth and growth figures, those figures will be higher, but they're higher because they're looking for at an extended period. It's not that you're looking at a higher level within the same period as you were previously operating to. So then moving to paragraph 5.19, I've set out there the proposed timetable for the Northamptonshire local plan. We're proposing that we draft a plan for consultation. We'll do so this year so that we can launch the consultation in January, February for the minimum 6-week period of 2026. Moving on from there, we'd look to consider the responses to that consultation and undertake a preparation of a publication plan for consultation in September, October 2026. So then, therefore, giving us a number of months to be able to go through, undertake any further evidence gathering, respond to the specific points, report back, debate, and seek to find appropriate solutions to the issues that are being raised. Then, following publication plan, in effect, that publication plan is the submission document. So we would submit that document in November 2026 with the responses to that consultation. So that will go into the Secretary of State. Then we're proposing an examination in March 2027, assuming that the inspectors are around to be able to deal with these high numbers of plans. We anticipate that the inspector would be reporting in October 2027, and we'll take it to our through our process to adopt in December 2027. So then, touching a little bit more on the Gypsy and Traveller local plan, officers have considered the process for progressing the Gypsy and Traveller local plan, and this was discussed with members of this EAP at a workshop on the 15th of January, earlier this year. Slippage means that the timetable benefits of preparing a separate plan would be minimal. So this was our intention initially, was to accelerate the Gypsy and Traveller policies to ensure that element that was progressed at pace. When we've really looked at the timetable now, it's going to run at the same pace as other elements of the plan, so that the timetable benefits really are quite minimal. So officers therefore consider it's more effective and efficient to incorporate the Gypsy and Traveller local plan elements, policies, into the Northamptonshire local plan. So we're meeting that requirement around a single plan. Another element is the Northamptonshire Minerals and Waste local plan. So a different plan. It's the first time I think it's been incorporated within Northamptonshire LDS. and a report is being presented to the executive on the 13th of, was reported to our executive on the 13th of February, and that recommended that a new minerals and waste local plan is progressed to adoption and prepared to cover the county of Northamptonshire, subject to the agreement of West Northamptonshire Council. Now, I believe the date, where are we now? We're 24th, aren't we? So on Wednesday, a report is being presented to West Northamptonshire's Planning Policy Committee. The recommendation there is that it reflects directly the same resolution that was agreed at executive, that together we go about preparing a minerals and waste local plan for Northamptonshire.
If I could interject on that, I've had a discussion with my opposite number on West Northamptonshire's cabinet, and they are minded to agree that the minerals and waste local plan cover both counties, but well, not both counties, both authorities, so the whole county of Northamptonshire. Thanks, Simon.
Okay. So then, looking at the timetable, bearing in mind that there's still some resolution to be agreed across the two authority areas as to timescales, timetabling, how we work together on these sorts of things, and so no one authority slows the other one down. Having said that, colleagues from the Minerals and Waste team have formulated a timetable that set out at paragraph 5.24, and as you see, discussions will start almost immediately on the preliminary work, looking to undertake issues and options paper consultation in September this year. From then up to spring 2026, analyse responses to that consultation, bearing in mind it's quite a different consultation, I think, to the Northamptonshire local plan in nature. It's very topic based. There will be some area focus to it, but it's also focused on the minerals and waste industry. So it's a little narrower, well, significantly narrower in that regard. So then moving towards spring 2026 for policies and an allocation document for consultation. In the summer 26, analysing the responses and then preparation of a proposed submission plan, then starts reflecting the Northants local plan in terms of a period for consultation, consideration of the responses, and then submission in 2026, forecasting examination in 2027, and then again adoption in in December 2027. There may be the need, once more detailed discussions have taken place, to revisit that, but we'll be seeking to keep on track with that timetable. So then moving on, as Chair indicated earlier, we are still in a good position. We do have full coverage of adopted Part 2 local plans. We have a joint core strategy that still operates, albeit that it's beyond the 5-year period. Then there's some other elements I'll just touch on very quickly around how we seek to ensure that we're keeping on track. There's always balancing priorities in plan making, as there is in any area, I suppose. But some of the areas we'll be seeking to do is provide to yourselves and with senior colleagues a governance reporting process, so that if there are issues that are showing themselves as being challenging, we want to get into those, to understand them, to understand what we can do, and understand how we go about ensuring that we're keeping the flow of work going, and we haven't got elements that are delaying the rest of the local plan policies. Other elements in there are around the proposed planning reforms. I'd say because we're because we're operating within the transitional arrangements, I think we're quite confident of the process we're operating to. But what we will do is we'll look at some of those other elements as more information comes about in terms of process to see how we can translate those to go about supporting our plan making. So if I use an example, one that comes to mind is we will be looking at policies on town centres as an example, but through the new reforms there may be initiatives that give a different system, a different process to go and look in detail at areas of policy that we haven't looked at in depth through this plan. That gives us the opportunity to review that and see how that can then slot in without it derailing the progress that we're expecting to make with the local plan. The final point I wanted to pick up on, I know it's always of particular interest. We're in the final stages of compiling our monitoring data, in particular monitoring on housing supply. It's not quite there yet, but it's becoming so. So the Council's housing land supply position currently remains robust, providing for the previous year some 6.69 years of a 5-year supply. So there is some headroom there. But with the new NPPF and new targeted figures, when we translate that into the different calculation, it sets out that at March 2023, we're now looking at 6.03 years. That includes a 5% buffer. So you can start to see that there's some shaving going on in terms of the supply figures, and we want to ensure that we remain on the right side of that. We've been successful over a number of years now in terms of sites that are coming forward, are allocated sites, and we've had limited appeals, certainly limited challenges on 5-year land supply. So we want to go about ensuring that in a positive sense through plan making we're identifying land to go about meeting local needs. That means that we are front loading our supply figure and maintaining a steady supply of land meeting the government's requirements. Happy to take any questions, Chair, and enter into discussions around the details I've talked about and any other elements that members may.
Well, thank you very much, Simon, and thank you very much for that very comprehensive overview of the situation. I mean, it is important that we continue working to this December 2026 deadline. Many local authorities up and down the country are going to be doing the same thing, so it is going to cause a heck of a traffic jam in Bristol, which is where the planning inspectorate are based. But it does, as Simon pointed out, it does provide clarity in the sense that we know what is expected of us. And those transitional arrangements stop after December 2026, and we don't yet know quite what the context and what the rules will be after. So it is imperative that we make every effort to get to this December 2026 deadline, because if we don't, I'm a little concerned by the government's suggestion that plan making should be simplified. I'm just wondering what the term simplified actually might mean. So it is something which is I think concerning. We do have changes to the National Planning Policy Framework. We do have a government that is committed to substantial growth And as we know here in North Northamptonshire, it could be, it's not as bad as it is in some authorities, but we have been asked to find an extra 11% of housing delivery. Whereas I know that some local authorities have been asked to find an extra 200% of housing delivery. So, it might not be quite as bad here as elsewhere, but that reflects the considerable growth that North Northamptonshire has already taken. And I think, colleagues thinking back for as many, for 15, 20 years, North Northamptonshire has taken considerably above national average growth in both housing and employment. And, it's perhaps also worth pointing out that the infrastructure delivery is not unlimited. And, there can be a cumulative impact of development on areas such as particularly the roads network and other things. We can all pick our favourites. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we can, we should, that we must meet this deadline, that we can have a viable, sensible local plan in place which will take us right through till 2045. And I do understand the increased growth that the longer plan period would require, but that is pro rata, not really an increase, it's just a longer plan period. But it does give us clarity going right forward to 2045. So that, I think, is important, because while no local plan is entirely up to date, because the day it's adopted, it starts getting out of date, and you've got to start on your next one, so we're told. That does provide a bit of long-term thinking, which is, I think, welcome. So anyway, I've a few thoughts from me and colleagues. Anne.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Simon, as usual. Clear explanation. I agree that we should submit a local plan under the old system, not the new system, and the sooner the better. I note under 517, significant progress has been made in preparing the local plan, and I completely agree. I couldn't agree more. But then I wonder why under 519, the draft plan consultation is only in January, February 2026. That's a long time. You have mentioned, you have explained to some extent, there are some contentious issues that need to be sorted out, and some evidence needs to be bottomed out and progressed further, I noticed. What are these contentious issues, and how will they be sorted out? And does it really need to take that long? Can't we do it sooner?
I'm sure colleagues will add to what I'm about to indicate. So in terms of the issues that we're contesting with, I think the first thing is around the basis of the plan. The plan is it will struggle unless we have the full range of evidence that you need to be able to get a plan through. It's reliant on that evidence. Now, we have got quite significant evidence in some areas, and as I indicated earlier, some of that evidence is takes us to a projected 2041, not the projected 2045. So we're looking to extend those elements. There's some other elements there. So there's one I'm aware of that we're currently working towards, which is and timely in some instances, is around working with the Environment Agency and flood risk. So, for example, we are conscious that we need to prepare a water cycle strategy, so basically looking at where that water goes that we have. But the information we've got coming from the Environment Agency at the moment is that they would like to see us update the strategic flood risk assessment. So that's no small piece of work. So we're forecasting at the moment, so and how long does that take, and how do we go through that process, and what consultation do we need to undertake to ensure that that's robust. So when we look through that, we're looking towards the end of the summer, early part of the autumn, for that piece of work to be completed, to then be working towards firming up allocations that we may wish to make. So we're, I suppose, risk averse in some ways. With some of the reports have been recently, to using that as an example. We don't want to be. We want to be identifying the most appropriate sites for land to be allocated for uses. We don't want to be storing up a problem further down the line because we haven't gone through the proper thorough process to ensure that the right land is selected and that there are knock-on effects. One of the other elements is around ensuring we've got the team and team structure in place to be able to progress that plan. Our numbers have diminished, staff numbers in recent times. We've been finding ways to go about keeping things on track, but it becomes more and more difficult. So we're at a stage now, also within the service area we operate, we're going through restructure. So we're looking to restructure the team, but in the meantime, we're also looking for ways to go about ensuring we remain on track. So we're considering which pieces of work we can undertake ourselves, what pieces of work we can ask that support input is provided, whether that be through consultancies or through agency contractors, until such time as we've managed to recruit into the vacant posts, quite a number of vacant posts that we have, so that they can then, like a relay team, take the baton and go moving that forward. I think, in essence, the biggest thing, though, is around the detail, is ensuring that we're getting things right and ensuring that we've worked things up at sufficient depth so that we're justified and confident in the plan that goes out to consultation. So we're keen to hit that first consultation for that to be as good as it can be in that position. We could arguably, I suppose, look to launch a consultation earlier than that, but I think the concern is then there isn't the depth there, and we're storing up delays further down the line as we may have to go back and review certain elements. So it's ensuring, I think, for that first draft plan consultation that we're robust in the presentation of the plan and the policies in the first instance, as much as we can be.
Okay, thank you, Simon. And it's absolutely right. You know, we have got to submit a robust document. It's no good sort of being a little bit, too much, submitting an incomplete or not properly consulted document without the depth that it needs, because if you do, then it'll get to the planning inspectorate and they'll just say, no, it's not sound. And we have experience, not at this level, but we have experience of a plan on a more local level being submitted to the planning inspectorate and it being basically said, no, you can't, you'll have to do it again, basically. So it is important that we get it done in a timely way. And, I know that there is buy-in from the highest levels of North Northamptonshire Council, from the chief executive, from the leader, and from the senior corporate leadership team, that we meet this deadline. So we will make it happen as far as this council's concerned. And we obviously have to work with a number of stakeholders. I welcome the engagement with the Environment Agency. As some of you know, I have a particular interest in flooding and water management. And, you know, it is important because we are seeing, well, we seem to be seeing warmer, wetter winters. We are seeing more instances of flooding. And it is important that that is contextualised in a plan which is going right forward to 2045. I'm going to bring Richard in, and then Robin, I know you had your hand up, and then Mark. So Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just really in response to Councillor Lee's issue about the bringing the plan timescale forward. I mean, plan making itself is incredibly intense in terms of the level of detail and resource it goes into. So the first thing I probably would raise would be that the timescale of the plan is no different to anywhere else in the country in terms of the timescales that local authorities would set. You know, they are long-term projects, they're incredibly detailed. You could look to cut it down in terms of, for example, important areas. So consultation is a big issue, but do you want to not reach out to the parishes and town councils across Northamptonshire? You know, those sort of elements are quite important. The Gypsy and Travellers element, for example, we anticipate will raise a lot of representations, as will the local plan itself. Dealing with that, you can get what I would say, it wouldn't necessarily run into the thousands, or it probably could, but the elements that are raised in those individual representations can run for pages and pages. Now, the officers need to understand the detail of those and respond to those. So the amount of work that's involved in local plans, I was involved in the Part 2 plan for East Northamptonshire, and from start to finish that took 7 years. Now that's, you know, a Part 2 plan for a part of what is now 4 times the size, if you like, of the council area. So I think in terms of the timescale is, in my professional opinion, is the best we can do. I think bringing that forward is extremely unlikely because of the work we need to do. And you've got that risk between, do you cut corners to get to an examination and get found out, or you've got to be prepared. We know this from previous, we've all been involved, the officers around the table, in examinations. We've all been lucky enough, if you like, to deal with plans that have got through successfully to adoption, and we know what needs to go into these plans. They're probably one of the biggest projects that the council gets involved in terms of timescale, as far as I'm aware. You know, several years is, I wouldn't say it's average, but it's not far off. I mean, some areas have been trying to get plans passed for a decade or more, and recently in the planning press, I think York City Council had its first plan for decades.
70 years.
70 years, yeah. I thought it was that, but even I was beginning to doubt that. I mean, that's 70 years. There's complex issues involved in all of these issues, some of which, as we sit here today, we just won't know about, but they will come on board as we move through the process. We've got some complex issues in Northamptonshire. One of the ones we've been dealing with recently is the impact of the special protection area, which is the Upper Nen Valley. But there's also a lot of work going on in terms of the strategic logistics warehousing around the area and the demand for all that. Now, our policies, and we've done some extra work on that, which arguably you could say, why has there been slippage? Well, when we drew up the plan timetable, we didn't necessarily think we would have to go and do some more work and get a new document produced on strategic warehousing. But we have, and I think it's been worth taking time out of the ultimate work on the plan to get that piece of work done, so that when we go into the examination, we can lean back on that and say, we've been proactive on this, and we're in a stronger position. So there's always that tension. You could always go forward with minimal information, but you have less to defend at the examination then. And it is really a case of the officers versus the world outside there. And David Brackenbury will know, because he was there with me every day at the East Northamptonshire examination. And you get thoroughly tested, not just by the examiner, but by all the parties around the table. And you know, like it or not, Northamptonshire is very much under pressure from development. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because with that you do get, hopefully, quality development. It's not an area in stagnation, but there are issues around that that we need to ensure that we bring forward properly. The whole area of town regeneration and town strategies doesn't just fall to planning policy, but is one of the main areas of the plan. At the moment, the council needs to get those resources together, because if, to bring together its visions for the town centres and what we want to do in those town centres. Whole environment issue, housing, employment, everything that, you know, that sits in those corporate plans and visions of the council effectively comes back to the land use policies of this document, which covers every ward and every councillor and has massive implications. I can't, probably in the minutes I would have to come back to you, but all I would say is, you know, I think there's good reason. I haven't even touched on resources, and I don't want to sort of be a negative today, but obviously, you know, one of the issues is that we will have to supplement the current team's resources to be able to meet that deadline. That goes without saying. But that aside, it's the amount of work that goes into those plans to get them through the examination. They are, by their nature, very involved processes. Hopefully I've given you a little taste of why, but the other thing I think I'd probably just like to leave at the end of this quick sort of discussion from myself on the points that you raised, Councillor Lee, would be, again, that we can work with you as councillors and that you can help us through this plan, because there will be a lot of representations from your wards about why we need the development and where the development's located and why can't it go elsewhere and why do we need it. We all know the implications of not providing this development. The land supply position would dip below 5 years and it would be planning by appeal effectively. So to actually forward plan, and it's a long while up to 2045, so the headline figures seem massive, but they are over, you know, 20 plus years. So we really need to be in control of that to actually say that the local authority has selected those sites and the development where it actually goes is something through the democratic process that's accepted. Because like it or not, you know, the need for these houses, employment units, etc. is out there. And if we don't provide them through a plan, they will be provided for us, and we don't want to be in that position. But we must do things as thoroughly as we can. So that's a little taster, if you like, as why the whole process is so involved and takes so long. It's not, I don't think it's exceptional. In fact, it's very much, you know, normal that the time scale that we've set out is based on our experience of other areas and our own experiences in terms of plan making. So I'd just like to leave that with you for the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Absolutely. Did you want? No, you're all right. Okay. Right. Well, no, that was useful, and I certainly agree with what you were saying. I mean, I did sit at the East Northamptonshire examination, and by gum, the planning inspectorate do, and the other stakeholders, but they do examine. It's certainly not a rubber stamp exercise. They really drill into all the detail of your plan. And the other point, you were right. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of consultation responses from stakeholders, from members of the public, from developers, from statutory bodies. There were hundreds of those responses, and every single one had to be looked at and considered. It's easy to think that consultation is just a tick box exercise and no one pays any attention to the responses. That is not the case. It isn't the case with us on the council, and it isn't the case with the planning inspectorate either, who see all these responses too. So it is very important that that we get a holistic approach so that as robust a document as possible can be submitted for examination. So, Robin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this report. It's really good. My query is, I know someone's just picked up about staffing, which you need more staff, but I'm looking at the budget pressures. Council identify requirements to make savings. Would this affect you employing more staff?
So the proposal we're working towards at the moment in terms of staff and structure and makeup of teams and so on, it is all within the budget envelope that already exists. So the structure we're moving towards is one that we anticipate will provide flexibility and range of skills. It will be attractive to the employment market, we're hoping, because there is a shortage of town planners out there. So we're in a competitive environment, and we want to go about attracting people in their career into an area that has that is forward-looking, that is imaginative, wants to part of wanting to be a planner is that you want to see better things delivered at the end of the day. You want to go about seeing quality and being involved in that, and you want to do so in developing your career. So if you've got that variety in there with staff, then the ownership, I think, develops. So we want to try to attract people to work within this area, to settle within this area, to invest in this area, and grow in this area. All part of a bigger picture. We recognise, though, also within the interim, to attract the staff that we are needing to. We've got to and meet this timetable. We've got to find other solutions in there. So that's where we'll be exploring who can help us to do what we need to do. So I know the team are talking to other service areas within the organisation to say, well, is it planning policy that needs to necessarily carry out some functions, or are there housing colleagues that can support on housing issues, or are there leisure or community service colleagues that can support on those other elements? Because it's a plan that serves the whole of the area, not just a planning policy element. Then there's the other aspects. So our assessment of it is that if you employ your own teams, your own staff, it's a vision that we have and we want to follow. But if we're appointing consultancies, there's an extra cost always to that element. If you're appointing agency contractors, there's an extra cost to that. So we want to try to keep that to a minimum whilst we go about attracting staff to it. The bottom line is the bottom line, though. The balance sheet is an important element. Local authorities are under pressure from budgets. That's a given. It's then how we go about prioritising that investment to ensure that we're being efficient and effective in what we're delivering. So as a team, that's what we're seeking to do through the structure. I know that I'm not saying it's wasteful in any way, but I know a neighbouring authority to here. I don't think I'm calling them in any way, but I know that preparing the local plan, probably about 12 months or so now, was so important to them. They put £2 million into it to just go about progressing that plan. Now that plan, I know progress has been made, but it's still not as significant as you would expect to accelerate it in that way. So we're being sensible, we're being considered in our approach, but we're being progressive and making every effort to ensure that we deliver what we all want to deliver, but we do so in the sense of value for money at the end of the day.
And I'd just add to that we are, by the standard of a lot of local authorities, we are not in a bad place. We're not in we do have to do a local plan, but we've got a strong foundation to build it on. While I'm not going to cap Simon's story of the 70-year-old local plan from Yorkshire, I have been in authorities, so I do some local government association peer work, and I've visited some local authorities whose local plan was adopted in 1987. And they've got to start from scratch. We don't. And as far as resource and it's not so much a question of money. It is, of course, it's a question of money, but it's also a question of having the right people in the right place at the right time. It's a question of project management and actually getting, because we know what the end date is. We need to be in a position for submission by December 2026. We need to have pulled that trigger. If we don't, it could cost us quite dearly going down the line, because the whole structure of local plan making may change. I don't know it will, but it may change. And then we would have to scramble to meet the change requirements. And while the evidence base would be the same, we may have to completely redesign everything. And that, of course, will come at a cost as well. So anyway, it's not easy. Mark, help us out of this dilemma, I'm sure.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Simon and Richard and Simon and Sue for blessing us with your time today. Look, it's a general comment on all this. I absolutely appreciate how much you have to do, and you know, I think you've done a fantastic job up to now. We, as an authority, have to be in control of stuff. So it is important we carry on. I reiterate what my colleagues have said, that I have some concern and reservation again, David, over resources. We've been short of staff for 4 years. This has gone on every time we have this. We're always bringing this up. And I sometimes have to say to myself, how serious is the hierarchy in this authority to make sure this works for us? And we have to be in control. And the local plan we've got is okay. Yes, we've got to change a lot of things. Allocations are really important, and I appreciate what Simon said about the resources and how we're going to, you know, how you're looking to increase the people, and I get that. I wouldn't like to think that in 3 years' time we're still going through the same story of resources. I think it's vitally important, is this. I also want to comment on almost on an isolation of departments, and it does concern me sometimes that nobody wants more warehouses, nobody wants more houses, and we have the same all the time. But we have to have this, so we have to allocate it, and we have to be in control of that, and that is so important, I think, for us as an authority. And being in control of it means the allocation of areas. But I think what really worries me as well, and the reason so many people don't want this, is we see nothing improving from a local authority's point of view when it comes to having those plans. So we've got the plans, but when it comes to reality of building out, as an authority, we do not get what's required. So we don't get that infrastructure. And I think whether that can be part of a plan, I really don't know. When I say about infrastructure, I'm talking about things like the hospitals and the doctors' surgeries, which we know are oversubscribed. We know that with Kettering East and that all those houses, and they're 6-7 years down the line, and there is no NHS stuff there. You know, the roads, the state of the roads, everything like that is infrastructure-wise. The lack of school places, all this is so important, and I don't know whether that becomes part of the plan itself, but I think if I put it out there, at least you understand, and because when we've done a local plan like this, when an application comes in, it's still almost the same planning officers that look at an application, do all the relevant work, and then either recommend or don't recommend when it comes to a committee. The problem is, when it comes to the committee, half the stuff that's required isn't there. And that really worries me. And I know that we can go down viability studies and everything, and I get that. But even going down viability studies, we have to somehow be able to, even part of the local plan, to be able to benefit as an authority that we've got that better control. And otherwise, people don't want it. So it's really simple for me. We don't. I tire of listening all the time about we don't want stuff. We can't do this. We can do anything we want to do. A, if we've got the resources, and B, if we can actually work with other departments in this authority to ensure that the public get what they want, or as near as, damn it, what they want from all these warehouses and all the housing that's there. And I take Richard's point about town centres. As you know, I was on Kettering Town Centre Plan for many, many years, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I think it becomes obvious when we're talking of housing that we need to be allocating a lot more flats, housing, call it what you like, within town centres. And I think that's something that gets neglected, but there are great opportunities there because then people live in a town centre and they'll use the shops and they'll do stuff there. So these are all part, again, part possibly of your planning. But I do think that's really going to be essential for us as an authority moving forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark, and well spoken, because infrastructure delivery is key. And, I touched on it earlier, but if we are going to take substantial growth as successive governments have asked us to do, then it would be nice if we had infrastructure that at least tries to keep pace with said growth, whether it be the hospitals, whether it be the road, whether it be whatever it is. And some of that is in our control, and some of that is not in our control, but it is all extremely important. And I also very much endorse your comment about town centre regeneration. I mean, let's look at where we are. And I know, colleagues, that I've sung this song before, but since COVID accelerated it, but it was happening anyway, there is a decline of the retail offer in the town centres. Fewer people, not none, but fewer people are going to go into Kettering or Corby or Wellingborough or Rushden to do their shopping, as happened when we were young, perhaps. Now people tend to go either online or to larger retail offerings, such as the famous Rushden Lakes or wherever you like. And that's fine, but how do we reimagine town centres? What is it that we want town centres to do? More culture, more leisure, more residential, as you point out in some ways. But it requires a complete revisioning of what we are doing with our town centres. Anyway, I'll finish that little maunder and pass you over to Richard.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'll start on that point because that was one of the things I wanted to sort of raise in response to Councillor Deering's comments. Yeah, I mean, town centres is a key part of the local plan, but it's not just about planning policy to deliver that. And one of the issues or challenges we're facing, I think, with the current position is the resource and the cross, not just policy, but some of the other key service areas in the council. So, it's that coming together, if you like, that we work with assets, we work with development management to a degree, but also with economic development to look at those town centre strategies. In previous councils, in previous years, yes, we've probably been better resourced, of course, but we look at, consultation on how those visions are developed. We work with internally and externally with stakeholders. We provide development briefs to take those sites forward because there's a lot of these redevelopment sites still sitting in the Part 2 plans, and we just don't have the resources to be implementing those Part 2 plans. For me, it's really disappointing because there's some good policies in there that looks to develop and take forward some of those, proposals that sit in. There is no sort of coming together, if you like. And if we do that and start leading on that, then what do we do with the plan and the timetables that we've just been speaking about? And it's really disappointing. You can have a plan, but you've got to implement it. That's the other thing. And to do that, you need some focus and some resource to do that. It's not always just about bringing people in, but perhaps also working more efficiently in some of the areas. There's also a lot of council ownership of land within those areas that can come forward and deliver money if those schemes come in. But there's a pain and a process to go through to get that benefit at the end of it. And I think from my years of experience in local government, we probably need, as a council, to focus a little bit more about being proactive and bringing some of those sites forward. And that's a little bit of a plea from policy because it's too big for us to sort of do it in our own right. We can write the policies, which we've done in the Part 2 plans, the council with its visions, the Big 50 and all that, needs to come together and have a focus on delivering those sites. We've got a role to play in that, but we can only do that if we are reasonably resourced. But even that aside, because I don't want to keep banging on about resources, it is about the structure of the council and how it works within its different service areas so that it can deliver that. And for me, that's one of the key areas of the plan, but it's only one of several chapters. It's a massive area. And I think the other thing to raise about resourcing and policy is that plan making and working on this local plan is only one aspect of what we do. There are other areas that, sort of vie with our attention, if you like, and that therein lies part of the problem. I've been working on neighbourhood plans quite a lot recently. We've got a massive active area of neighbourhood plans across Northamptonshire. I was just looking the other day, it's between 40 and 50 that are either made or going through the process. Now, some authorities have got full-time officers working on those. We don't have that luxury at the moment, so we're all involved in those, and you'll know, there are a lot of areas that are currently working through their neighbourhood plans, and they do take a focus because the legislation for those means we can't go, look, come back in another year and we'll look at that. We have to look at it within certain weeks. So in some respects, they take priority over the local plan making side as well because of the deadlines and the timescale that the legislation requires you to come back and take those through the process. One of the unsung areas of planning, which is really, really important, is monitoring. It's a really sort of dull area, shall I say, in terms of you think, well, monitoring, what's all that about? But that is the bedrock of everything we do. It gives you your 5-year supply. It gives you an idea of how you're doing in terms of delivering your sites. It provides more interesting detail about the type of units or of employment and housing that you're actually delivering and what the needs are and what your policies should be saying moving forward. That's been an area which we've found difficult to bring forward. I don't want to keep stressing negatives here, but it is something we need to think about. It's how do we get that monitoring? We've got different systems within the council because 4 councils coming into one, and the way we've been doing it in the past is perhaps inconsistent. It's all things we're contending with behind the scenes, which we don't often talk about. But I would say you're monitoring, it's almost like the foundations under a house. If you get all that wrong, the whole lot comes crashing down. We have to do that. If we have appeals, we relied on to provide that monitoring information. With Kettering Energy Park and stuff, there was a lot of ask on the policy side for detail and background. You have to keep that up to date, otherwise it becomes really, really difficult. Same with the employment monitoring. With the big B8 applications further down the line, we may have to come back and do a lot of work on the employment monitoring to explain exactly where we are. So you need to keep that ticking over as well. So I think, those are some of the areas which I probably touch on. The only other one, I think, Councillor Steering, which you raised, which I totally agree with, is on the infrastructure side. And unfortunately, because of the focus on the plan making and some of the areas that, are really key, there's not the additional stuff that policy have done in the past that we can envisage doing at the moment. Personally, a Section 106 contributions SPD, supplementary planning document, which supplements policies, would be absolutely brilliant. I think it'd probably pay for itself if consultants did it, because you could up the fees, justify that probably, and bring in more money from contributions. That I know from the East Northants, current document, it's very out of date. It's not index linked, so it doesn't go up every year with the costs. I think personally a consultant could come in, whatever it costs would probably be recouped through a revised document and being able to charge more for contributions from developers. That's something which, needs to be a discussion perhaps outside of this room in terms of, is that something that's a priority? It could end up as cost negative or cost positive to the council in terms of doing that piece of work, but you don't have the resources in-house to do that at this moment in time. So there are things we can do around infrastructure, and we've got to produce an infrastructure plan as part of this local plan, which is a massive piece of work in its own right. But beyond that, it's always difficult in planning because I think one of the issues which you'll know as councillors, but it is that new development only has to mitigate its own impact. So if there is a problem down the road, as long as that situation is not made worse by the new development, that's acceptable in planning terms. Obviously, it's frustration to all of us, but that's the way planning works. It works not to make a situation worse as opposed to improve it in some respects. Although, obviously, our policies will go as far as they can to make sure that, as well as keeping the status quo, if you like, it also does you know, the new development brings improvements with it, you can do that. And certainly where some of the developments are bigger, you'll get local improvements, not just in terms of design, but in terms of accessibility or the way that, you know, something actually functions within the area. So I don't want to be too negative on that and say it won't improve the general area. Yes, it can, of course, but there is that bottom line, and that's what the developers around the table at examination will be arguing. And the viability is always an issue. There is viability rather more in some parts of Northamptonshire than others, and we obviously will be undertaking a proper viability exercise through consultants, which we always do on the local plan to justify the approach. Quite often it is a challenge, and you have to make those decisions at the end of the day. What's important to the council? Is it delivering affordable housing? Is it delivering other types of infrastructure? You know, what is it design? What is it we want from the plan, and how good do we want to be? So they're just a few things I think on top of my mind in terms of, you know, sort of responding to those comments, which, you know, are valid comments, but, you know, there does need some thought about how we actually work as efficiently as we can to deliver the resources that we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I think that was useful. Mark, did you want to come back?
Please. Thank you, Richard. There's no offence against you. I think this is great. There's good discussion, is this, David? Look, the most important thing for me, and I appreciate prioritisation, it's a very good word. And as a council, as a planning authority, you know, planning policy, etc., placemaking, you know, it's important that we get these priorities right. What I hear, and again, I understand Richard's not trying to be negative on this, but what I keep hearing, David, is we simply don't have the resources, and therefore certain things take a back seat. That is not good enough for us as an authority. And again, it's nothing against our officers, this. If you can pinpoint, as we let's take a very good example of what we own as a council, and we sell off assets, once an asset has gone, it has gone. That money comes in once and it has gone. Now, you know, for my reckoning, we're short on housing, key ways, etc. We need that social housing, and we have got places that we could turn ourselves, but we don't do it. And it's like, oh, it's a cost, but actually, it's like everything. We don't ever appear to look at the consequences of not doing something. And then, as Richard rightly pointed out, if you do X in those town centres, the likelihood is you're actually going to make money and not lose money on doing it. But because we don't have the resources to look at X, it's not being done. And I think, you know, we have a huge opportunity to grasp it and deal with this for the next 4 years. You know, governments will change. The next government's going to change again. Things will change, but that's not the point. The point is having the control, looking at what, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat today. Looking at what we've got, looking at what we can achieve, but having those resources so that everything is prioritised properly and we're not missing out on income, because that's what we are doing. We're missing out on income because we don't have the resources to deal with it. And if, as I said, if it's something external, it's external. If that's required, if you need a consultant, you need a consultant. Ultimately, if it pays for itself and or it makes money, we should be doing this. You know, otherwise we are just plodding along, quite frankly. And we have, for me, it's just grasping this. There's so much we could do as an authority that, you know, that we can be the exemplar of the country in a way, because, you know, we're ahead of the game on so many things. We've done so much right, but there's so much more we could do, but we cannot do it if we don't have enough resources to actually put it together and run it properly.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mark. I think that's right. And it's certainly interesting because this is a discussion which actually goes way beyond planning policy. It goes way beyond, you know, the whole planning service, because it is actually a part of our strategic vision. Now, we're talking, you know, we have a sort of strategic vision called the Big 50, which reaches out to 2050. Now, placemaking is vitally important as part of that big 50 vision. What is it we want to be looking like in 2050? Where do we want everyone to be? How are they going to live their lives? Because we want Northamptonshire to be somewhere that people want to come and live, want to come and work, or want to come and visit. And then we mustn't forget the visitor economy either, because that's quite easily done. Picking up on something, what Richard's saying is absolutely right, that an individual planning application has to mitigate its own effects, whatever they may be. But in that, there is little, the cumulative impact, and I've been saying this for as long as I've been on planning policy, which is quite a long time, its cumulative impact is not always taken into consideration. And it needs to be, especially when you are talking about large-scale industrial or employment development. You have that individual development might be mitigated, indeed, but then there's three more, all of which individually might mitigate themselves, but all three of them together might not, if you follow me. And that could be anything from highways to the environment, to visual amenity, to flooding, to all sorts of areas. And I've always been worried about the cumulative impact. I mean, I'll give you an example, is our dear friend the A14. Isn't that a wonderful road? Felixstowe to the M1, M6. And it's brilliant. They spent billions of pounds making it posh between Brampton Hut and Huntingdon, and hats off, that's a good job of work. But you've now got your two-lane highway going from there to Kettering, where it gets posh again for a few miles, and then 2 lanes again to the M1. And, well, I think everybody in this room's been up and down the A14 more times than they care to remember, and you know what it's like. And we are wanting growth, and that's becoming a major choke point. Now, how does an individual employment development compensate for its impact on the A14? Well, it doesn't. It's not taken into consideration. And when you have 10 individual employment developments up the length of the A14, there is that impact. So it's really important. But strategic vision is also important. And you're right, Mark, to point out that it's absolutely vital. It isn't just us. It isn't just the planning service. It's a wider conversation. It isn't just the council either. It's a wider conversation for the whole country. And one thing I do love about this committee, or this EAP, is cross-party, but there is no party. This is not a political committee at all. Governments come and go. Governments will always have their own priorities, and we have to accommodate those priorities, or at least take them strongly into, they are part of what we have to do. But essentially what we are all doing is trying to get the best result for Northamptonshire, and that is something which I do like about what we've been struggling with sometimes over the last 4 years, is we are trying to get the best outcome for the people who not only live here but want to come here. Northamptonshire is this place you drive through on your way to somewhere interesting, but it need not be so. We've got so many good things in this area, and we perhaps have been a bit reticent about shouting about it. But again, that's a much wider discussion than this meeting, and is something about the vision that we need to take forward for Northamptonshire and for Northamptonshire as a whole, and indeed for this region of England. Right, anyway, that almost became a polemic. Mark?
I'm going to come back on you on that, David, thank you. Cumulative is a really interesting word, cumulative, and I think that is something that we should be taking into consideration, and I appreciate that A14 is a very good example. It is major highways, we don't have that sort of control over that. But when you look at the towns in general, cumulatively, we should be taking that into account, so especially when it comes to the roads. So I appreciate that one area, Grange 2 in Desborough, as for instance, they will only be able to do so much within so many square metres or yards of whatever the site is. However, across the roundabout is another development of 200 odd houses. And so, but we're not taking that cumulatively, and that is the issue I have, because it's all right, we're in a little silo, we're just going to pass that one, and what have we know that land's allocated, it'll come eventually, but we're not looking at it cumulatively. If we know that's being allocated, somebody should be, quite frankly, looking at that and thinking, well, there's 280, 300 houses going there, there's another 200 going there, like 200 yards up the road. It's clearly going to have a major effect on those roads, let alone the doctor's surgery and the dentist there and the schooling. So cumulatively, what can be done? Now, and I appreciate that it's a grey word, is that, because you could say, oh, well, hang on a second, then what about Desborough South? And what about that one that's just up Gold Street, or the one that's being built at the top? You can't necessarily put all of those together, but what you can do is look at it as a patchwork quilt almost and say, well, those two are south and next to each other, and those two are north, and those three are east, and cumulatively you can work on those areas, and we don't do that. Now, I don't know whether that's something that can go into the into placemaking or into the plans, and I don't know, but again, I'm coming across the fact that when we go about the cost of this authority, it costs us money on all sorts of things, as we all know. And if something's neglected and a cost then comes, we're the ones that pay it. Whereas if it was part of, go back to section 106 and that, but if it was part of that and it was all the departments work together, and I'm afraid to say highways is the most appalling one, well, that and environment, quite frankly, or enforcement, sorry. Enforcement and highways, but they need to be working with all of us, because that, oh no, we just write, oh, that's okay, we can do that, but then the effect of that then costs us, oh, we've now got to pay for that junction because no one else has paid for it. That's money out of our coffers, whereas if somebody had sat down sensibly and said, well, that development's going to affect that junction and that's coming in the next couple of years and that will affect it, then cumulatively we need to do something with that junction. But I'd never see that happening. And, I'm kind of banging my head against the wall. And that's why we smile about it. But genuinely, part of our planning and everything, we've got control of it, but we do need to involve all the other departments in this authority so that we can get things done better than we are doing, and have your big 50 is a great thing, but it's a vision. And what happens with a vision is you need to bring it down step by step. I can't go to the top of my house by starting on the 10th run of the stairs. I have to start on run number 1. So big vision is number 10, and what we have to do is collectively bring that down to all the individual steps required to achieve that. And I know I'm talking overall here, but this is how I see it. The big vision was great. I was involved in that. However, you're prioritising the bits from big vision, but when we're talking planning here, it's so important that we take those bits of the big vision, we bring it down to the final minutiae, and we put steps in so that we can achieve it. But that requires resources and prioritisation, and it needs to be done properly.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you, and I couldn't agree more. Don't bang your head against the wall. You'll hurt yourself, and don't do it if you're standing on the 10th step. But no, I mean, you raise a lot of really important points. So, Simon, would you like to touch on? We have a stereophonic Simon. Simon.
Thanks, Chair. It's on this issue of cumulative impacts and the sort of work that needs to be done on that. And Chair, very familiar. We've had these conversations over many different pieces of plan making. So in terms of the highways, to pick up Councillor Deering's point, just to sort of reassure members that through the plan making work that we're doing at the moment, cumulative impacts is a key consideration. So as an example, we're working with Highways colleagues to provide the information that Councillor Deering describes to feed into the transport model to look to 2041, 2045 and identify the infrastructure that's needed to meet existing future growth. So that cumulative impacts. And I think as that piece of work is sort of more sort of, you know, we know where the sites are, we've got an idea of their phasing. Other elements of infrastructure planning are potentially more challenging in terms of health has come up in member discussions and that sort of longer term. But we've actually got a meeting with colleagues in the NHS later this week. We've also got a workshop with Highways colleagues within the council on Thursday. So both of those we can feed the comments that you've made at this meeting into those meetings. And we've actually meeting with National Highways next week. So through the plan making side of things, cumulative impacts is absolutely key, and we are doing that work in the transport model and infrastructure planning that Richard touched on is going to be absolutely critical. Obviously there is the challenge that members have often raised about when it comes to an individual application and an individual application goes to committee, how that cumulative impact and the infrastructure that's identified through the plan making process, how that actually manifests itself on site-specific 106 contributions, but I think I'd say from a sort of officer point of view, we've got a very strong relationship with colleagues in Highways, and we're working and we are trying to, you know, make sure we have similarly good working relationships with all the infrastructure providers, because as members have raised and the community raises frequently, infrastructure planning is going to be critical in the strategy we take forward through the local plan. So, yeah, just to reassure members that the work is fundamental to the local plan. It is taking place, and we will use the meetings that we have with the various infrastructure providers to make sure that the comments that you've raised at this committee, we can input them into those discussions. And the A14, yeah, absolutely. That's something we will be looking for National Highways is thoughts on when we meet with them next week, particularly with the sort of quantum of employment development that's been promoted along that corridor. So thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. I would be extremely interested to get some feedback from that meeting because, yeah, I mean, it's not news. We've been talking about the A14 for 15 years or more, but certainly be very interesting. Richard.
Yeah, it's a really brief point, but I think it's important. Obviously, the authority is currently consulting on a local transport plan, which we'd like to have more time to put into, but we'll have to think about how much we can spare on that. But obviously yourselves as councillors, as well as the general public and internal stakeholders, can comment on that plan, because it does touch on a lot of those issues that you've raised as well. So it's important that local transport plan gets it right, and it is asking through that consultation, have we got it right? Are these the things we need moving forward with? So do have a look at that, even if it's not a response, to just make sure that you feel that plan is saying the right things, because it will touch on a lot of these. There's a lot of synergy with the local plan, really, in terms of where we're going on that. Unfortunately, I've not had time, or colleagues, I'm sure, haven't either, to have a look at that in detail yet. And it's one of the things we should be doing. But then, obviously, it's like the big old question, should we stop doing work on the plan and start inputting? Look, I'm not going to get into that. But to do everything we do in policy, you've got to be quite thorough. So we will have to spend some time, I think, and have a look at that, even if it's sometimes the amount of work that goes into it is a page of comments. But that's important, because once those documents are there, those are the things that get tested at examinations. Those are the things that when the planning application comes in, that everybody looks at and goes, well, why isn't the council doing this or that? Where's the strategy to sit behind that? Where's the challenge to that? And these are the documents that, they're not always in the forefront. They're out to consultation, but not everyone picks up on those sort of things. And it's important we get all those underlying issues right, so that when you do assess things, you've got all the information, up-to-date requirements and policies, be it from planning policy or highways or whatever, that you need in place, So have a look at those documents, even as not even as, but as councillors, and see what you think, because they will come back to you for approval at the end of the day. But like I say, if you feel there's something wrong, it's good to have a quick look at those and just perhaps try and influence those documents as they develop as well. You know, not just from yourselves, but from constituents, from the wards and the parishes get involved, the town councils, etc. You know, I can't really stress enough in terms of how that policy comes together, really.
Well, it's an interesting thing that, you know, planning policy is not something that's widely understood by everybody in the council, and yet it's so important. Everything we do and everything we're talking about here affects every single councillor, every single ward, and every single resident up and down Northamptonshire. And of course, trying to promote the fact that we welcome feedback and comment and input from town and parish councillors, from members of the public, from anybody, is really important. So you couldn't emphasise it enough. Robin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just picking up on some of the issues, what people are saying. The NHS, I think this is always going to be an issue. It's the same with Hamwood Park. We've got the development which is being done, yet we're probably going to end up waiting nearly 10 years for it to be put in place, possibly, even though there's the 106 policy on this, that it should be in place. But it's a breakdown with us, well, not us, I suppose, the NHS not sort of going in and sorting it out, you know, and it's down then to the builders then to either build it and then put in a private company in to run it. Well, the idea is you start at the stage where the policy is saying, you know, NHS will put a surgery in, but it doesn't always happen, and this is a big issue. And the same with the secondary school. I know it's been talks being done, but it should be there. It should be starting to push forward, and it's not planning for, but we seem to be always, it's an issue, and I know there should be a way forward, and I think it's hard. I know it's not anybody's fault, but I don't know what we do to sort this out.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a delivery. A lot of infrastructure comes when you hit a trigger point. So you don't build a doctor's surgery for 2 years and it's not, because the NHS have to man it. Yeah. They have to resource it themselves. So when you've got a development of, you know, another couple of thousand houses, Hamwood Park, for example, there will be a trigger point at which the doctor's surgery has to be delivered. There will be a much bigger trigger point at which the secondary school will have to be delivered. But it won't come, you know, you don't just put it up and wait for something to happen. That's always the difficulty. And it can be very frustrating because before that trigger point's reached, there's nothing there.
But the problem is, though, you know, Kettering schools are sort of getting where the point where they can't take children and they're going further afield. So I know what you're saying, David, but if something's not there, we're going further afield.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And yes, we've got difficulties with, you know, education, kids not being able to get into their preferred schools and having to settle for, you know, that has a detrimental impact on our home to school budget, because of course if you don't get your preferred option, the council has a statutory duty to provide transportation, and we spend a lot of money in that. Hello, Richard, you're going to help us here?
Yeah, I think hopefully. I mean, we've got a working relationship now with the NHS, and as Simon just mentioned, we are meeting with them shortly, and we can perhaps out of this meeting perhaps take up that point in a bit more detail, Councillor Carter, so I'll speak to you afterwards and perhaps raise that with them, because I need to understand it in a bit more detail to talk to them about it, but happy to do that. In terms of some of the areas, it is very difficult. I mean, a lot of the urban extensions, the big developments around the growth towns of the area, for example, have got buildings in neighbourhood centres that are quite flexible, so they can be turned to a number of uses. What we often find is, you can provide those doctors' surgeries through the contributions and the developers building out the estates. It's actually populating them with doctors, nurses, whatever that is the problem. That unfortunately goes beyond planning policy. So that has to come together. And, we've taught, not that we can change that ourselves, but we understand some of the issues around that. And that is about, how the NHS obviously recruits and trains people up to actually populate those areas. So we can actually deliver the buildings, it's the staffing that's the issue. So where perhaps we are in a bit more control, if you like, it is with the schooling system, and we're currently trying to get further information from the education side of the council to understand the implications of where we build future developments. Fortunately, we're still chasing that, but that's another story. We're actually looking at, part of why it takes so long to develop these plans is when you put allocations in place, there are so many things you need to understand that, is it assessed as the right settlement and the right location within that settlement to put that development, because it'll have impacts on education. One of numerous things it will impact on, I won't go through the list, but you can imagine the various sort of subjects and areas that development impacts upon. But in terms of schools, it's understanding, where is the constraints, where is there changes and opportunities to develop those schools, where is the capacity. We're currently seeking all that information, but when we've got that, we can start to understand a bit about that's one aspect of allocating development. But it'll always be a balancing act, because in some areas the schools might not be quite so good, but the other factors might mean that actually, we talked about transport, environment, I could go on, but it is a balancing act. And unfortunately, over time, as you get more local plans, the more obvious sites are gone, and it's always for planners, the sites become more difficult with coalescence further out from centres. Planning gets more difficult in terms of the obvious sites become less obvious, if you like. And that's something that we will have to sort of work through in terms of a strategy. I mean, at the end of the day, getting that strategy in the local plan is important. I think it's all very well for developers to argue against that strategy, but if we get it right, it's not a case of alternatives. A developer arguing at an examination has to show that their proposal or their strategy is better than the council's, not that it's the same or whatever. It has to do something better and show that we've missed a trick, if you like, in terms of the way we've gone about things. That's the way examinations work. But we have to justify our position, and that takes a lot of work to do that. So everything's done thoroughly, it has to be, because those that challenge the examination and the plan are very thorough in themselves. So everything you raised is being looked at. Sometimes we're struggling to get some of that information, but we won't stop trying to get that information. We'll get it eventually. It just becomes a longer process because it's not always readily available. But we are, rest assured, being very thorough in what we do.
Thank you, Richard. And I echo the planning inspector on an examination. They don't miss anything. I mean, some of you have been to examinations yourselves, and you will have noted the thoroughness with which every point brought by anybody is looked at and analysed. And when they go away to consider their verdict, they won't have missed anything. So it's really important. Anne.
Yeah, I'm just alarmed that you say we are waiting for that information, because already at the time I was a councillor on Kettering Borough Council, and we had a Kettering East Liaison Committee where we discussed Hanwood Park and the planning for that on the long term. And already then we were asking for the medical centre, and we were even told, oh, well, in the future it's just more a matter of phoning a doctor. You want, there'll be less need to go and visit a doctor in person. I don't think there was long-term planning at the time. So I think we left it far too late, or we built the trigger points in far too late.
Sue.
So just coming back on the education point, we are working closely with our education colleagues, and I think some of the delays that they're looking at a council-wide strategy for education going forward. So it's about looking at what the capacity of each of the individual schools is, which ones can expand, and looking long-term in terms of population growth, as well as where we want to allocate growth. So there's sort of two elements to that going forward. But I just wanted to reassure you that that work is being looked at. It's taking a lot longer than we would have liked. But again, that comes back to Richard's point about making sure that the thoroughness is there, and that feeds into the process. But I just wanted to reassure you really that work is going on.
By the way, sorry for mixing up the schools and the medical centres, but it's the same for the schools. These schools should have been there now. We've got in our ward, Councillor Carter's ward and mine, Windmill, just pupils sitting at home because they've got no place to go to, and it's a perfect storm together with the fact that home to school transport is no longer as generous as it used to be, so they're not being taken to the school, and there's no easy bus service. So it's a drama for the families. That I think our planning for schools has not been sufficiently timely in the past.
Okay, does anybody want to comment on I mean, these we're back to trigger points and provision of the major resource like doctor surgeries or schools. Yeah, Richard?
Well, it's difficult, that, isn't it? Because it goes beyond planning policy. I think it is a wider council approach, isn't it? I mean, some of the big urban extensions obviously are taking longer to develop. The one that probably is closer to me because of where I used to work within the old authority was Rushden East. It hasn't delivered a single house yet, so it's not going to have the school probably will be earlier in the process. But that's one example. The school hasn't been built, nor have the houses. But again, the schools on that site will primarily serve the new development, which is what a lot of new development does. Like we said, it mitigates its own impact. So any existing problems within the system, that obviously needs to be looked at very carefully as well in terms of how the council operates its education provision, which goes beyond policy. But it's something that we need to understand in terms of how we move forward with the plan. But we're only part of the solution. Mainly the solution perhaps lies elsewhere. But in terms of delivering development, what we need to understand is that new development does have the right facilities attached to it, if you like, to take it forward. But that won't resolve all your current position and problems. That's something that the council needs to look at on a wider basis.
Yeah, okay. But, I mean, Anne's absolutely right to raise it, because, and Robin earlier, because infrastructure is something which we've done, which is so fundamental and for what was also said about, about the public's confidence in the plan-making process. It is always said that, okay, we welcome growth, but we welcome growth, sustainable growth, with the necessary infrastructure. And of course, when you get the growth but not the infrastructure, it is a problem. Even if it's perception and the infrastructure comes later, it is always. It needs balance and management. And I appreciate it's not just a matter for this committee or even this council. It is a wider strategic issue, a lot of it. But again, I'm pleased you're having meetings with the NHS. I know you have regular meetings with Highways. I know you have regular meetings with the education team, and obviously, my colleague Scott Edwards, who's our education portfolio holder, I know is also very concerned about this. And there have been a lot of increases in provision, especially for special educational needs and so forth. But it's not, if we are growing, so does that sector need to. Okay, any more? Right, well, I think we've had a really useful discussion, as usual. Planning policy team never come out of these meetings totally unscathed, and nor should they. But no, I think we've really had a very valuable discussion, and I know I've been looking at Simon here, and his pen has been flying. So there's quite a lot for the team to take home and consider. You will see the recommendations at 3 and 3.1. It is recommended that the Planning Community's Executive Advisory Panel consider the draft revised local development scheme and, subject to any comments or observations, and there have been both comments and observations, agree that the draft LDS be advanced to the executive meeting for adoption. Do we agree? Yeah. Right. In that case, that is that. And thank you very much, all of you, for your input, because, as I say, that was a really useful discussion. I didn't have my notebook with me, so I've been scribbling on my pad, but I'll get to it. Okay. Agenda item 5 is our usual quick run through the executive forward plan. March meeting is the last one before the pre-election period. So you will see there's a Wellingborough and Rushden area local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, which could be interesting. And then there's all items as you see them. Swywell Country Park Reservoir Drawdown Capacity Improvement Project. Yikes. Oh, I see. Right. To improve the ability to lower the water level in the reservoir, which seems sensible, I guess, should an emergency situation arise. So that comes, I guess, into our flooding part of the world. But could be useful, so I'll be interested to see that paper. Partly tying into this, the economic strategy for Northamptonshire. That's been a very useful piece of work, trying to draw in businesses and other stakeholders to actually inform the business and employment growth in this area. So that's not just businesses, but that's also very much the education and skills sector, because without people, businesses can't recruit. So it is quite a important, again, joined up piece of thinking, and I'm grateful to everybody who's contributed to that. Then there is this little paper on the local development scheme, which we probably don't need to go into because we've just discussed it, and a couple of other areas. April will be within the pre-election period, and so probably won't be terribly, business as usual. So there are still areas to discuss. South Midlands Authority Joint Committee terms of reference, Household Support Fund, and then there will be no meeting in May. So if anybody has any comments or questions on the executive forward plan, what's there, indeed what isn't there, are there any thoughts? Okay. Right. Well, in that case, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to close the meeting. I'd like to thank all officers for their wisdom, for their input, and for their help. I'd also like to thank you members and ladies yourselves. It's so nice to see members of the public coming and taking an interest in our deliberations. And with that, at just before, it was 10 to 12, yeah, and